This is normally where I lay one up at the net and let John spike it to tell you what's on the show with Joel Sherman and John Heyman, but John's on vacation this week. So I'm here to tell you I'm going to do a little bit of a monologue on where I think the Yankees are at now. Billy Eppler, the general manager of the Mets, is going to join us to talk about the trade deadline, the present, and the future of the club and himself, what his role is. And I think I'm going to do a hit or error at the end about the colossal blunder of the Baltimore Orioles. That's if you stick with us on the show with Joel Sherman and John Heyman. So this is the show with Joel Sherman and John Heyman, but if you're watching us on the Yes app or listening to us on the podcast, you're not hearing the other side of the conversation. John Heyman's on vacation this week, so I'm going to try to do this solo. And I thought, since we have Billy Eppler as our guest today talking about the Mets, I figured let's try to do a little deep dive into the Yankees. And since I don't have John here to bounce it off, I figured let me put down some thoughts on where I think the Yankees are right now and why they're there, and see if I could put it all in one place at one time, since I knew I'd have the time and the ability to do it by myself. And I want to begin at the winter meetings of 2018, because at those winter meetings, Brian Cashman, when he was asked why they weren't signing Bryce Harper, mentioned that his team was a fully functioning Death Star. And I think what he meant by that was that they had it kind of going on at every facet of the organization. And he had created real clear divisions and a process of how they made decisions. And, by July of 2016, he had accumulated enough power that for the only time in 50 years of Steinbrenner ownership, they were sellers, notably of Chapman and Miller. They made big trades. And the next year, surprisingly, they got all the way to ALCS Game 7. The year after that, they won 100 games for the first time since the championship in 2009. And, in that moment, you could see what Cashman probably meant, right? It was humming on all levels. In 2019, they'd win 103 games in their first division since 2013. They'd get knocked out again by the Astros in the ALCS, but they hit a record 306 homers that year, even without Bryce Harper and Manny Machado, who everyone screamed for. And then they took Garrett Cole away from the Astros. This should seem like a moment where things rise. And yet, things begin to go the other way here. And I know everyone always wants to say Cashman's an idiot and they don't do anything right, but you should be a fan of the Angels or the White Sox or about 10 other teams. The Yankees do a lot right. If you turn two non-entities into Clay homes, you kind of have an organization that A, knows how to find talent and then knows how to fix talent. So let's not act like nothing ever goes right here. But I want to dig into some of the stuff that's gone wrong in the Death Star, and really stuff I think that Hal Steinbrenner has to ask Brian Cashman as he figures out what to do moving forward. Keep Brian Cashman, try to fix it, etc. And the first question I would ask is, are the Yankees too easily locked into theories? In 2018 and 19, they won 203 games, and they played what I would call casino baseball. Why casino baseball? If you think of like counting cards and blackjack, the idea is to gain an advantage over the house by playing with religious ferocity one way and doing it over a long period of time. And the Yankees casino baseball, it's 162 hands, 162 games in the season, is to play to hit home runs and do whatever you have to hit home runs, and you'll win 95 plus games, and don't worry about how bad the other games look. And, they had that mindset. And one of the things that happened was the ball was flying then. It was a very juiced baseball. I don't think it was unintentional, but I also don't think it's unintentional that the air came out of it and that it's now harder to hit homers. And how long do you want to stay in that philosophy, which made you overly right-handed and unathletic and brought players to the team that are big and bulky and likely to get injured? You have too much of that. It's not a good thing. Your defense is going to struggle. Your injured list is going to grow year to year. I would just point out something right now. Do you know Giancarlo Stanton's homer percentage this year is above his career average? It's above his career average, but he's been hurt again. He's a base clogger. He can't really defend. He's hitting 203 with a career low walk percentage, 6.6 homers 6.6%. That's his homer rate. What does he do in the other 93, 94% of the at-bats? The Yankees kind of got away from that, and I wonder if they got locked into that philosophy for too long. Question number 2, what's going on with amateur player procurement and then player development? The Yankees haven't had a top 12 pick since they took Derek Jeter in 1992. And I would tell fans to go to Baseball Reference and go through drafts and see if you don't have a top 10 pick, how hard it is to accrue talent. Nevertheless, the Yankees really have not done a good job in this area, especially when it comes to position players. Who's the best position player that they've drafted who's active right now? Easy, Aaron Judge. Who's number 2? Anthony Volpe? Who's number 3 in that group? Rob Refsnyder? Who's number 4? Josh Smith or Kyle Higashioka? You kind of get the idea. Like you just got to even get to average more often so that you have guys to go to. They haven't done that. Internationally, you would think the Yankees have big advantages in every home, right? No brand like the Yankee brand all over the world. And, there's pools, so you can't just spend indiscriminately. But look at what the Astros did for almost very little money. Luis Garcia, Christian Javier, Jose Urquidy, and Framber Valdez. That's almost an entire rotation for less than a couple of $100,000 that they found. Yankees haven't found anything like that. Among their active players who they signed internationally, the only 2 who've made all-star games who are active right now are Luis Severino and Gary Sanchez. They signed Sanchez in 2009 and Severino in 2011. And beyond the intake of talent, what are they doing in the minor league level to prepare guys? Are they kind of just playing the exit velocity game with the position players? Are they preparing them to play at a high level, the game of baseball? It doesn't look like it when you're watching the Yankees. I think they need to mind the store better. Number 3, what's happened with player acquisition? Since the deadline of July 2021, the Yankees have success stories. They acquired Clay Holmes at that trade deadline, Anthony Rizzo, Jose Trevino. They paid cash to the Reds for Jake Bauers, who's been a nice little story this year. But the downside is the devastating moves that were made, worst really of Cashman's entire tenure. Joey Gallo, Josh Donaldson, Isaiah Kiner-Falefa, Frankie Montas and Lou Trevino in one trade. A lot of prospects went out the door and a lot of payroll was taken up by mistakes. And why didn't the Yankees have better intelligence, spy intelligence I'm talking about, on makeups of guys like Gallo and Donaldson? And if they did, why did they ignore it? Why did they have second years with those guys? Here's a big question. Like when I talk about second years with those guys, how long they went with guys like Sanchez, Miguel Andujar, Clint Frazier, Chance Adams, and now Davy Garcia, who was designated for assignment this week. Why didn't they see how unnerved Isaiah Kiner-Falefa was at shortstop last year? Key word in there is see. There's metrics that show Donaldson hits the ball hard. There were metrics that show that IKF is a good fielder, but you couldn't be watching the game and really believe that. Sometimes you got to put the graph paper away. 4, is there good self-examination going on? This was a team that lost Garrett Whitlock and Trevor Stephan in the Rule 5 draft. Are they doing the best in areas like mental skills, strength and conditioning, base running, etc.? I'll use the base running one for an example. Last year, the Yankees didn't have Anthony Volpe, who's a very good base stealer, right? They stole 102 bases and were successful 75.4% of the time. This year, that was 15th in the major league, 75.4. This year, with Volpe, who's very good at this, they're at 75.6, on pace for 97 steals, and they're 25th in the majors in that percentage. Why have they gotten worse when the rules have made it easier to steal a base and with a real base stealer on their roster? This is all part of the Death Star. These are various wings under Brian Cashman. There was a time not long ago when it seemed like most of these areas were humming along pretty well. But I wonder if they've become too entrenched in philosophy and not flexible enough with changes in the game. I wonder if they've become to believe so much that their eyes lie and the metrics tell the truth, and that they're missing some blatant stuff right in front of them. I wonder if they become so siloed in their coaching and in their thinking that nobody's looking at the big picture like they need to be looking at it, that they've lost something about the game, the competition. Think about the dynasty Yankees, highly competitive, high baseball IQ. And so I wonder what Hal Steinbrenner should be doing and wondering, is Brian Cashman the guy to put the Death Star back together? Stick with us. We have the other general manager in town, Billy Eppler, joining us on the show. back on the show, and our guest is the general manager of the New York Mets, Billy Eppler, who obviously was at the center of the storm during the trade deadline. Nobody moved as big a names or as large a group of players as Billy did. Billy, thank you so much for joining us to kind of assess that trade deadline and kind of give an idea where the Mets are and going forward. And if I was going to begin this with a question, I am curious, when did you have a first inkling this season that it might not be what you had hoped for in spring training when you put this team together? What triggered it, and when was it?
Yeah, good question. I mean, we try to just look at the season in thirds, but even when you get a little bit more granular than that, you kind of look at April. It's kind of easy to replay. We start in Miami and win that series, go to Milwaukee, take it on the chin in Milwaukee, come back, play Miami again and the Padres, do well, go on the West Coast, do a great job on the West Coast. And, I think at that point in time, you're thinking like, okay, great. This feels at our custom level. And, the bullpen and David Robertson was emerging at that time. And then we hit May and we go in to Detroit and we get swept in Detroit. And then frankly, just, didn't play that well during that month. And then that compounded into June, being a really poor month. I mean, there's really no other way to say it. And so, some of the components of the club, and when I say components, I'm talking about position players and starting pitching and the bullpen. At any given moment, some of those components weren't performing, at an accustomed level, or and so that kind of left us with a couple different areas where we had underperformance or we had some holes. We all have talked, myself or Buck and you and everybody. I mean, everybody knows what happened in spring, and the loss of Edwin and how that manifested in a lot of people having to pitch in different roles, or the number of high leverage relievers shrunk. And when you play a number of games in a row, that has a cascading effect. To like pinpoint your question and say like, this was that moment in time where there was an epiphany. It was just kind of a snowballing effect or compounding effect of some of the circumstances. And so, as we got towards, the later part of June, you start thinking to yourself, all right, is there areas that we can, help this club? It's hard to swing big trades, prior to the deadline, or even before the All-Star break. That doesn't happen very, very often, unless you're talking about like money dump situations. And so, we started to kind of think, if this doesn't turn, how do we be, at our best, or take advantage of these kind of circumstances to some degree that none of us wanted to be in. And so we had to kind of start thinking through what things could exist and what things could kind of become a reality, while giving the club as much runway, as possible. Even to the point of after the All-Star break.
Bill, can I just jump in and ask this, because you're kind of at an inflection point, maybe to give us the mechanics of that, like who goes to who? Do you have to make a recommendation to Steve Cohen and say, I think we should sell? Does Steve Cohen come to you and say, logically, in my kind of business baseball brain, say we should sell? Take us through the mechanics of how you get to a decision to do what you did and go as deep as you did. Sure.
Steve and I talk regularly, so this isn't, we didn't have to have some kind of, scheduled meeting to talk about strategy. I think it just naturally comes in pretty much every conversation that we have. He'll ask really good questions about how we're thinking about things and, what we might be looking to achieve in the short term. And so, as we were having some discussions, frankly, right around our draft time, the thought of, what position do we need to be in before we start looking for opportunities? What position, like, what do our odds need to look like? Or what, of the games, we were going to play the Dodgers, the White Sox, the Red Sox, how many of those did we want to bank? How many wins did we need to bank there? And then, also recognizing the teams that were in front of us and, weighing in, their strength of schedule, our strength of schedule. So, these conversations just, happen pretty regularly. And when the opportunity, or I should say, when the, kind of the events of post White Sox, Red Sox kind of took place, it was at that time where we were going to start, seeing if there would be interest and just looking opportunistically at what that exactly could look like. It wasn't a approach of we need to move this player or this player or this player. It was let's see if there's a way to enhance the longer term goal of the organization. And we set a bar pretty high. And I had talked about that even after the Robertson deal, that we were not going to liquidate or sell all pieces and look to reposition or save money that some teams do. We were going to set a high bar, have high standards for what came back in these deals, and then evaluate it. And so because what we're faced with, Joel, at that time is like pretty consequential decisions, right? And so the matrix of decision making is approaching the decisions as, are they reversible or not reversible, and then are they consequential or not consequential? And this was something that wasn't reversible, and it had some consequences behind it. And so we needed to evaluate our situation honestly, create a strategy, set a high bar, and see if it can be executed on and what could be executed on. And so that's kind of, how we unpacked it all. And, hopefully gives you a little bit of a lens into how we got to where we are now.
Bill, you mentioned the big picture goal, and both you and Steve has in some way suggested that their jobs should be judged by if you put together that kind of world-class farm system, feeder system that brings in quality players to the major league roster on a regular basis, gives you the equipment to make trades at any level on a regular basis. The big picture question I would ask, and don't mean to be insulting, is like anybody, if I were going to pick the prospects, I would get it wrong. I don't know it. Why do you believe, like your history with the Angels, you didn't that's not great drafts, right? You've had a couple of drafts with the Mets. Like, what makes you feel that the model and the process you have in place is two good drafts so far and a good process here, that the prospects you got for Scherzer, Verlander, Robertson are guys who are going to really make a difference for the Mets?
I mean, look, it's probabilistic. That's why the players at the minor league level, whether you're, paying for them, if they're, international players that are coming into the marketplace, or if they're players that are acquired through trades or through drafting, it's all probabilistic. And so if we're, paying down a player to a certain extent and pulling a prospect back, that's the investment that's put in that prospect. It's still not to the level that a player with maybe a similar forecast at the major league level would cost. So if player A at the major league level is going to cost us $80 million, $100 million, if we can get a prospect that maybe costs us $25 million in a buy down or $20 million in a buy down, but we see the potential that player could become a $100 million player, an $80 million player, like it's all like a probabilistic kind of calculation. And so some of the prospects that we acquired will pan out, and some will not. But it's the opportunities and like the number of bites at an apple that you're kind of looking for in that equation or in that calculus. And so while like, we can go through any club's drafts or any club's trades and see certain things that have happened and point to successes and also point to things that didn't work out. And that's just the probabilistic nature of our game.
Billy, at the end of this process, you I think a couple of different interview settings, and I think Steve Cohen did the same thing, suggested that the team's playoff odds will not be as good in 2024 as they were going into going into both 2022 and 2023. Can you there's been some question about what that means. Are you an also ran? Are you a contender? How much will you fight for it? I'm wondering if you could frame what you mean by that and what level of quality you expect your 2024 team to be.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this a little bit with after the Scherzer trade, after the Verlander deal is, we intend to have a competitive team in 2024. And that is not a season that we're punting. Now, we did frame it in an accurate way where, our 2022 odds, walking into that season were anywhere between, if you look outside to like, get an outside view, there's anywhere between 88 and 90 wins, right? And that's taking into account like, what do the sports books say? What does the Post say? What does the Athletic say? What like all these different sources, and we just kind of take the wisdom of the crowd and we look at that, and then we look at that for 2023. And I tend to, take a peek of that. I mean, we have our own internal projections, but that you can be a little riddled with happy talk when it comes to that stuff. And, everybody looking through rose-colored glasses. So, all right, let's take the outside view and looking at that, going into this year. So what we're trying to articulate or how we're framing the 2024 is, we're probably not walking in with the same odds or the same win total over under expectations that we did in 2022, 2023. But that doesn't mean that we won't be a competitive club. That won't mean that we're not going to put a product on the field that we can stand behind and feel good about. So I think it's just, trying to frame a little bit of how we want to approach the wintertime and some of the transactions and how we always want to be mindful of, building players internally and enhancing, that farm system to get to that blueprint in the future where we have sustained success and can put together a perennial playoff contending team.
Billy, did you present it in the least rosy possibility to especially Scherzer and later Verlander? Because ultimately the big picture thing was you wanted to get as many prospects for them and wanted them to agree to waive their no trade so you could do this?
No, I needed to be completely honest with them. And again, like I said, with my discussion with Max or just players in general, like I'm going to keep that private. I think that's important for trust and our relationships. Like if I'm asking for a player for insight into something or to give me what they're thinking about, I want to, or maybe be vulnerable, that's just going to hinder my relationship moving forward. And so I want to keep that private, but, just in general, like I'll be very honest, with players and, especially players like that have, levers or mechanisms in their contract to kind of, chart their own course a little bit. I want them to get a full view of the picture because, you don't want to be in a circumstance where they think one thing should happen or shouldn't happen. And then that does. That's why they built those levers in their contracts, or their agents built those levers in their contracts. So I want to be very transparent when it comes to that.
Because Billy, when I look at it, I wrote this in the post. I think, look, I can't believe from what I've gotten to know about Steve Cohen that he's ever going to punt any season. Doesn't seem like the kind of guy who's just going to say, let's cough and corner it. You guys could dominate the 1 and 2 year market if he's willing to keep the payroll high. And I think I could sell to Scherzer and Verlander or whoever, like we're going to re-sign David Robertson or someone like him. Diaz is coming back. We could get, here's the list of players we could possibly get on 1 and 2 year contracts. By the way, the Phillies went to the World Series as wild card. Why couldn't it be us next year? I don't think your 2024 is quite as bleak as kind of like there's a public perception. And I just wonder, could that have been sold to Scherzer and Verlander, stick around because it's not that bleak?
Yeah, I mean, again, those guys are going to unpack the, unpack the conversation and kind of think through, what the circumstances are and like what the outlook is, and they'll make the call. But again, I just wanted to, be transparent and answer any questions that they had. So, I think that, we'll go into this winter, with a strategy and see how we come out the other side. But again, we will have a competitive club in 2024.
Billy, I assume most of this is you just try to get the best prospect available, but I think we'd all probably agree on some level that the area of need in your organization depth-wise was pitching close to the major league level, especially. And the best, it seems, of what you got in this prospect haul were positional guys. How do you get to the point where your feeder system is bringing you young quality pitching on a regular basis?
I mean, look to acquire it where we can, and I mean, in the Mark Canha deal, we were able to pull back a pitcher. It wasn't like a strategy to stay away from pitching. In fact, if we, thinking about this, in more of like a value proposition, if we're thinking about the value of a player to be X, and it's a position player and a pitcher right next to each other, we would lean towards the pitcher. If the value proposition is maybe like X minus 10, and that's the pitcher equivalent, and the position player is at X. Well, I don't know if X minus 10 is the right call at that juncture. And so that's a little how we kind of think about it. But in our conversations, in our talent identification process, it's kind of run through our scouting department and our player personnel department and our analytics group. If we weren't going to force the shot for a pitcher, but if it was there and things were equal or close to equal, maybe would have pivoted in that direction.
Billy, one of the 2,000-pound rhinoceros in the room is the question about, Steve has mentioned he's going to hire a president of baseball operations. David Stearns, his name is hung out there now for a couple of years, and he is one of the big free agents this offseason. I wonder, just a two-part thing. Do you think how the team has played this year impacts at all how your boss thinks about your job and the need to get someone else? And are you comfortable that you're going to keep your current job with some real power if and when he does bring in someone else?
Okay. Yeah. So the first part of that question is no, I don't think that what Steve was talking about, I don't think that was colored by 2023, because that was something that we talked about before I even, ended up, that was something that we talked about even before I ended up taking the position here, and as I've kind of gotten to know Steve, in that time period since, late November of 2021, I think I understand how he views and looks at the world, and he appreciates, systems and process and kind of an evidence-based way of implementing decisions and direction. And that makes sense to me. It's how you can really improve. And, you have to kind of understand and formalize the process at which you make a decision so that you can like iterate off of it and improve that for the future. And that's the philosophical kind of approach and one that resonates with me and one that I believe in. And so my goal for the Mets is to be successful and to have a sustained winner over time. And as far as a president of baseball ops, I look at that through the same lens. If we have an opportunity to enhance leadership and help this organization be more successful, I'm going to embrace it. And speaking specifically, like I've been around team sports my entire life. Like, you know, before I was, 10 years old, like I'm in first grade, second grade, like spending time at Chargers training camp, and a lot of my experiences in life and have been being part of a team, and working towards a common goal and challenging each other, and adding more talent to an organization is only going to be a good thing for this place. And so, I think that's I think that's the right thing to do. And when that comes and when that happens, we'll ultimately be governed by the opportunities that exist to bring in talented, high caliber individuals. So
including a title above you, you're comfortable with that if it improves the team.
Yeah, absolutely. And so and I've been a part of the process, or I've been involved, and I've been having the conversations with Steve on this. And so this is kind of like, to get corny with the acronym, like together everybody achieves more, but like that's what being part of a team's all about. And I embrace it. And if it's going to help this organization, and we're, like I said, we're bringing in, high caliber individuals, like we're all going to be better off for it.
That's my memory that I actually pay attention when you talk to me. You went to Chargers camp. Ernie Zampese was a family friend, right? Yeah. He was a well-known offensive coordinator in the 70s and 80s, right? And 90s. Ernie Zampese.
He meant he passed away within the last year, but he meant everything to me. I'm not in pro sports without his influence and just kind of my admiration for him and his family, and how I'm still my best friend to this day is his son. And so he meant a lot, and that was just my exposure to getting yelled at by Coach Coryell for crashing a golf cart or whatever. That was those were really good good moments in my childhood.
Yeah, it was just a humble brag by me to prove that I actually pay attention when you talk to me, Billy.
That was good. Gold star, Joel.
We asked about your situation. How much of what's gone wrong this year is the manager, is Buck Showalter's fault?
Steve talked about this. Like this is on the players. I mean, the players play, and we had times where, like I said, some of the components weren't clicking at any given time. And so, I like Buck. He's not afraid to be vulnerable. He'll provide an opinion, but he also doesn't lose sight of the overarching, goal of the organization. And he's worn so many hats that he really has a good view of, the organization kind of, at its entirety, rather than in just his domain. And so, at the end of the day, like what we have to be able to do is we have to be able to provide every support that we can for our players. And we have to be able to put them in a position where they're the best versions of themselves, and optimize them and challenge them with new ways of doing things, or new strategies, or taking little risks and experimenting at times. And so, as long as we're supporting them, and that the players feel supported, then I think that we'll get where we want to go.
So he's your manager in 2024.
Yeah, I mean, Steve's talked about this, and he's discussed it in his most recent media session. So, we signed Buck to a 3-year deal, and like I said, I like him, and I've worked well with him.
Yeah, my 9 cents is I actually think the kind of team you're going to have next year is the kind of team that Buck manages best. Brett Baty, you just sent him down. He was clearly one of the better prospects in the sport, viewed as one of the better prospects in the sport. It didn't work well on either side of the ball in the major leagues. What do you think happened? What is the future for this player?
Yeah, I mean, we believe in Brett's ability, and that view has not changed. And, I think the best way forward for him today is in AAA, where he can feel a little bit more freedom to try things in the batter's box, to try things defensively, maybe hunt pitches, or get in certain situations where he's maybe looking to ambush a particular pitch and get out in front and get it airborne. And on the defensive side, giving him the freedom to kind of play loose, play free, throw from multiple arm slots, and just take some chances. And, Brett cares a lot. And I think sometimes, that desire and that drive, I mean, he's the son of a coach. And so, he's got a very big team mindset. And I think that, with some maybe more seasoned pitchers on the mound and things like that, like you get yourself into a situation where you're trying to not make a mistake rather than trying to just play with your hair on fire, play loose and take some chances and let's see what happens. And, so getting him, a little bit of time down there, like a timeout, I think was important at this time. And then just getting the feedback from, the hitting coaches and the infield coaches, and setting some objectives that are measurable and achievable, will be important for him. And hopefully he's not down long. But that'll, a lot of that's up to him. But he's got a really good head on his shoulders. We had a really good conversation yesterday. I'll be following up with him later on today. And, I just want to make sure we stay invested there because Brett's a big part of our future.
Will he be the Buck Showalter's third baseman next year?
Let's get
you
through.
You see what I did there with Buck Showalter also. That was kind of like a double down on it. Yeah.
Let's just get through. Let's just do our jobs right now. We'll focus on now.
Look, one of the big questions, certainly a lot of your fans have asked and media has asked you, is about who's not here among your close to the major league prospects, and that's Ronnie Maurizio. The other guys have at least gotten cups of coffee or more. The Alvarez thing has obviously worked out very well on both sides of the ball this year. Why is Ronnie Maurizio not part of what's clearly now, at least for the rest of this season, let's see what we have for the future?
Yeah. By the way, did you make him Italian? Maurizio?
Maurizio, how do you want to say it? It's just the part of Brooklyn I was born in. A lot of Italian. Yeah.
I'm messing with. So I just got to return serve every once in a while, yes. Joel. Okay?
We're good. It's ping pong. We'll go back and forth. Hey, if I'm going to play, I got to accept that someone else is going to play also.
So on Ronnie, there's just still some things that we want to see, both on the offensive side and defensive side with him. And, I talked about this a little bit, kind of post Robertson, Scherzer, Verlander, my sessions with the media there is I don't want to put somebody in a position with all the lights, all the focus, and everything on them unless, they're banging the door down. And, on the offensive side and the defensive side, there's still things that we want to see. And he's a young, talented, thoroughbred. But we also want to just be mindful of the stage here, and kind of the gravity and the responsibility that kind of comes with that. And, remain open-minded to adding him in the future, but still just need to see, more of the objectives, or more of those boxes checked before we go down that path.
Billy, are you comfortable with why there's been so much widespread regression by so many players this year? I'm sure there's a lot of individual stories, not one story on McNeil and Marte, Scherzer when he was here, Ottavino, a few others for sure. Why did this happen all at once to a team that was very good last year?
Yeah, that's kind of been, I don't think there's one answer for that. I mean, that's been the thing that I think keeps a number of us up at night, or doesn't really bode for a really good night's sleep. And it's just I wish there was one answer, but there's not. Teams deal with injuries, and but to your point, I mean, there's a number of players that didn't perform to like their 50th percentile, or their accustomed level, and haven't been in line with maybe what was what was expected at the start of the year. And so, some of the things have been reinforced by old adages, right? Oh, you never have enough pitching. But we want to continue to kind of optimize that pitching group through pitch design and usage and locations. And, so, I think with a number of these guys, I think they were hitting the general like ebb and flow, almost at the same time, where if one or two in a lineup are going through it, that's sustainable. Especially like if you look at the 2022 team, the length of the lineup, look, we have stars on our team, but it wasn't like one or two people just carrying a club. There was contributions top to bottom, and there was like this relentless kind of attack. And so when you have that, like if one or two are kind of underperforming for, a given time, that's, you can guard against that. But when it becomes a bigger population simultaneously, harder to recover, add to that starting pitching either not going as deep or having its own inconsistencies or injuries, and it just created a compounding effect. And then you start to wonder, like, how much are they wearing this, and how are they navigating through this as a group and as a unit. And so I'd love to be able to give you like one reason, I've appreciated the contributions of a lot of the guys, and some of the players that have come in, have done well. And but to identify one reason that this turned the way it turned, I think it'd be satisfying for me and you and everybody, if there's one reason. But I just think it's it's a mixture of events and circumstances.
Yeah. As a way to wrap up, Billy, with a question. Look, I do appreciate and respect the ping pong. It's easy to come on when the team wins 101. This is a tougher time to come on, and I don't just say it as road. I appreciate you going deep into all this and doing all the explanation. So the last question I would ask you is, like, look, Met fans are obviously very disappointed. They really believed in this group that it would be it. What would you say to suggest that tomorrow is going to be better for this franchise with something sustained and successful?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm actually really glad you asked it, because I got asked the question. Is sitting behind the home plate in Binghamton this weekend. I went up there.
There's just some guy in Binghamton who could be doing this podcast instead of me. Jesus, thanks, Billy. That's
so I went there and I got asked that question. Maybe not framed that exact way, Joel. Okay, quite a wordsmith. So, I think that while what we did over the deadline was hard on a lot of people, me included, and the people in the clubhouse and players, and what we were able to do and the talent that we were able to bring into the organization, might have taken 2 to 3 draft cycles to accomplish. And being able to grab prospects that are at AA, high A, AA, even AAA level, shrinks a little bit of that development ladder down, and it really enhances and kind of like helps expedite the blueprint of where we want to go. And we don't want to endure 5, 6, 7 years. When we play against some clubs that have gone through long periods of darkness in order to round out a player pool, a young player pool, and a strong farm system. And that's not what we want to endure. We want to be able to execute on that quicker, We want to be able to be aggressive and repurpose Steve's investment in the team in order to do that. And so, what I would take away is a couple things. One, having Steve as an owner, if I was a fan of this team, you should feel pretty lucky because the willingness to invest, take chances, is evident in the day to day, and his outlook of the club. And then, at the same token, being able to bring in that high end talent that's closer to the big leagues to round out, last couple drafts, like you alluded to, whether that's the Paradas and the Williams and Tidwells, and I mean, even Tyler Stewart and Christian Scott and a number of the Mike Vassals and a number of the players that are here should make the fan base and our supporters feel good about what the future looks like, knowing that they'll have an owner that's going to continue to invest in this club, both at the major league level and in the infrastructure and some of the things that he's alluded to that aren't quite as recognizable and aren't quite as noticeable, but are still critically important to executing on the future. I think that should make people feel good.
Well, Billy, I always appreciate our conversations. They're usually one-on-one on a phone call or in person. We get to share it with the world a little here. I always enjoy doing it. I always feel kind of insightfully nourished by it. So thank you very much for joining us on the show.
Yeah, no problem, Joel. Good to connect, and appreciate the time, bud.
All right, Billy. We'll be back with Hidden Error right after this. This is normally the part of the show where John and I play Hidden Error or Error. Oftentimes we take opposite viewpoints. John's not here this week, and I just think there's an easy error. It's kind of the talking point in Major League Baseball right now, and it's about the suspension of Kevin Brown, one of the announcers who does Oriole games. If you saw, he said pretty benign stuff about how the Orioles have won more games at the Trop at Tropicana Field in St. Petersburg against the Rays this year than they had in the last couple of years. And somehow for that benign and I would think somewhat positive statement, he was suspended. The belief is by the ownership of the Orioles, the Angeloses, or one Angelos in particular. And look, I'm here to say how ridiculous this is. It's one of the things that worries me about about who owns what and what gets said, and just how much free speech there is and what gets crushed along the way. And I saw a lot of people come out about this and say things like, well, it was in the game notes. The Orioles management itself is putting in the game notes what their record was in Tropicana Field, or a producer for the TV segment said like put a graphic up about it as a way to kind of mitigate it. Well, say those things didn't exist. It's just a fact. He just said a fact on the air. And by the way, say he had been a little incendiary about it. Say he had said something that did rightfully may have crossed the ownership in some way. Is this what this ownership really wants to be known for? Somebody who's qualified to do their job can say one or two sentences that offends them and they're going to be suspended or lose their job? Is that the chill that this organization really wants to place over in a country where free speech is supposed to be at the very heart of what we do? Are they this thin-skinned? It should be unacceptable. And so to me, there's two things that have to be done here. Whoever made this decision, don't hide behind someone else. Don't let someone else be the fall person. Come out and make this a 24 or 48-hour story. The cover-up is always very often worse than the crime. Just come out and say, we overreacted. This was a bad job by us. We should have not done this in this way. This broadcaster, Kevin Brown, didn't do anything wrong. We did something wrong. And then the second thing is realize that you've stepped on the Orioles, who are as good a baseball story as there is this year. The guy's on the field. And the likelihood is they're going to be very good for the next few years. And that means there's going to be a lot of scrutiny of the team, both local and national, in a way that the Orioles haven't had it for a while. Because I'll say this to the Orioles ownership: you were tanking. You were purposely losing baseball games. That's why you were bad in places like St. Petersburg at the Trop, right? But now you're going to be paid attention to. And the second thing you could do here is learn the lesson. You got to let this stuff bounce off of you, especially when it's just a true fact. Your team is about to be a big deal. Don't belittle people to a big deal. Anyway, next week, John will be back and joining us on the show. It's a podcast from the New York Post. I always appreciate all the work, especially this week when I'm alone, that Jake Brown and Andrew Hartz do in navigating us through each show as our producers. Don't forget, the show drops every Wednesday on the Yes app. Give it a view. Please rate, review, download our show, Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. And please continue to join us each week on the show with Joel Sherman, and in the future again, John Heyman.